The avoidant thought you chased them, but you disappeared instead. The avoidant thought you chased them, but you disappeared instead. The avoidant withdrew into their familiar defended distance, expecting you to respond with your familiar pattern of pursuit, expecting you to text, asking if they are okay, to express concern about their absence, to reassure them of your continued interest despite their withdrawal, to make effort to maintain connection they were refusing to maintain. Their withdrawal was not goodbye, but was instead strategic distance designed to manage their defended comfort while keeping you engaged, to test your investment while avoiding their own vulnerable investment, to create space they needed while ensuring you remained available for their eventual return. The avoidant learned through repeated cycles that you would pursue when they withdrew, that you would close the distance they created, that you would do the relationship work they refused to do by maintaining connection despite their patterns making connection difficult. This learned expectation made withdrawal feel safe. They could retreat to defended comfort knowing you would remain present and pursuing, could manage their engulfment fears knowing you would not actually leave despite their distancing behavior, could have both the space their defenses craved and the security of your continued availability without having to choose between defended autonomy and relationship connection. Yet this time, your response differed fundamentally from every previous withdrawal cycle. You did not pursue when they withdrew. You did not text asking what was wrong or whether they needed space. You did not reassure them of your continued interest or express hurt about their distance that they could then manage or respond to. You simply disappeared. You stopped initiating contact, stopped responding to their minimal breadcrumb attempts if they made any, stopped monitoring their social media or asking mutual friends about them, stopped organizing your life around their potential availability, stopped existing in their sphere in any active way. Your disappearance was not strategic silence designed to make them miss you or to punish them. It was genuine release, reflecting your authentic decision to protect yourself from patterns that were harming you. Your authentic investment in moving forward rather than remaining stuck in dysfunctional cycle. Your authentic recognition that relationship required your constant sacrifice without adequate reciprocation, and that you would no longer sacrifice yourself for someone who demonstrated through consistent patterns they could not or would not meet your legitimate needs. The avoidant detected your disappearance as qualitatively different from your previous responses to their withdrawal. Previous temporary distances still included your energy oriented toward them. You were hurt but still engaged, angry but still pursuing, distant but still monitoring their life and hoping for their return. Your current disappearance includes none of that familiar energy. You are not hurt in ways that indicate you still care, not angry in ways that show continued emotional investment, not monitoring in ways that reveal ongoing attachment. You have genuinely released them and genuinely redirected your energy toward your own healing and your own life that does not include them at its center. This authentic disappearance created crisis the avoidant did not anticipate because it violated their fundamental expectations about how you would respond to their withdrawal and about their own importance in your life. The crisis stems from multiple collapsed assumptions. They assumed you would always chase them regardless of how often they withdrew, that your love meant unlimited patience with their patterns, that your investment was permanent regardless of their inadequate reciprocation. They assumed their withdrawal was a powerful tool they controlled that generated your pursuit without risking your actual departure. They could create distance knowing you would work to close that distance rather than accepting distance as your opportunity to leave. They assumed they were important enough to you that you would not genuinely move on, that you would remain psychologically oriented toward them indefinitely, that you would always be available if they eventually decided they wanted relationship with you. Your disappearance shattered all these assumptions by demonstrating you will not chase them indefinitely, that your patience has limits that their patterns exceeded, that your investment was conditional on adequate reciprocation they never provided, that their withdrawal gave you opportunity to leave rather than giving them control over distance, that they are not important enough to you to justify organizing your life around their defended dysfunction, that you have genuinely moved on rather than remaining available for their potential future interest. The disappearance particularly wounds the avoidant's ego because it demonstrates they are not as special or irreplaceable as they believed. Throughout relationship, their pattern suggested they viewed themselves as person whose value exceeded yours. They could withdraw, knowing you would pursue. Could be inconsistent, knowing you would remain reliable. Could provide minimum, knowing you would continue providing maximum. This dynamic confirmed their inflated self-perception that they were more valuable partner whose limitations you should accommodate, because access to them justified your sacrifice. Your disappearance contradicts this entire self-concept by demonstrating you assessed the relationship and determined they were not valuable enough to continue pursuing, not important enough to continue sacrificing yourself for, not worth organizing your life around, given the inadequate reciprocation they provided. You voted with your feet that they are not as special as they believe themselves to be. This vote wounds their ego more profoundly than explicit criticism would wound, because your authentic disinterest cannot be defended against or rationalized away as easily as words can be dismissed. Your pursuit always validated their worth. Your absence destroyed that confirmation. The avoidant's sense of their own value in relationship context became dependent on your consistent pursuit despite their withdrawal, on your continued investment despite their inconsistency, on your reliable presence despite their emotional unavailability. Each time they withdrew and you pursued, each time they cancelled plans and you remained available for rescheduling, each time they demonstrated inadequacy and you continued tolerating that inadequacy, they received confirmation that they were valuable enough to justify your continued effort. Your pursuit communicated that they mattered enough to chase, that access to them was worth the work of maintaining connection they refused to maintain, that their presence in your life held sufficient value that you would accept whatever minimal effort they provided rather than leaving to find someone who would reciprocate adequately. This validation through your pursuit became integrated into their self-concept in ways they did not consciously recognize. They did not think explicitly, I am valuable because this person keeps pursuing me despite my withdrawal. Instead, they simply felt inherently valuable as person, felt that their defended autonomy was attractive quality rather than relationship limitation, felt that their emotional unavailability was acceptable baseline rather than inadequate dysfunction. Your pursuit allowed them to avoid facing that their patterns are problematic by confirming that at least one person found them valuable enough to accommodate those patterns indefinitely. The pursuit validated not just their worth as person, but specifically validated their defended patterns as acceptable or even desirable. If you kept pursuing despite withdrawal, perhaps withdrawal is not actually a problem, but is instead maintenance of attractive independence and mystery. Your consistent pursuit also protected the avoidant from facing deeper fears about their lovability and their adequacy as partner. Beneath their defended presentation of independence and self-sufficiency, many avoidants harbor profound insecurity about whether anyone would genuinely want them if they showed their authentic wounded self, whether their defended limitations make them fundamentally inadequate as partner, whether they are capable of sustaining intimate relationship without eventually being rejected for their patterns. Your continued pursuit, despite their patterns, provided evidence against these fears. You kept choosing them despite their inadequacy, kept investing, despite their withdrawal, kept returning, despite their patterns that would drive most people away. This evidence allowed them to suppress their insecurity and to maintain defended self-concept as adequate or even superior partner whose value you recognize through your persistent pursuit. The validation structure created specific psychological trap where the avoidant needed your pursuit to maintain their sense of worth, while simultaneously their defended patterns created the withdrawal that generated your pursuit. The pursuit-withdrawal dynamic became self-reinforcing cycle. They withdrew partly to manage defended discomfort and partly to generate your pursuit that confirmed their value. Your pursuit validated their worth and encouraged continued withdrawal that would generate more validating pursuit. The cycle continued indefinitely, with each withdrawal generating pursuit that confirmed they were valuable enough to chase. Your role in this dynamic was to provide constant confirmation through your pursuit that they were worth pursuing. Your job was to validate their worth by demonstrating through your behavior that they were important enough to justify your continued effort despite their patterns. Your disappearance destroyed this entire validation structure by removing the pursuit that confirmed their worth. When they withdrew this time, expecting your familiar pursuit, your absence, instead of your pursuit, communicated a devastating message. They are not valuable enough to continue chasing, not important enough to justify continued effort, not worth pursuing given their consistent inadequacy. The absence functioned as assessment. You evaluated their worth relative to the cost of pursuing them, and you determined they were not worth that cost. This assessment contradicted all the validation your previous pursuit provided, forcing recognition that perhaps they are not as valuable as your consistent pursuit led them to believe. Perhaps their patterns are more problematic than pursuit suggested. Perhaps they are not an adequate partner who deserves unlimited patience and continued investment. The destroyed validation particularly wounds because it came through action rather than through words. Previous times you expressed hurt or frustration about their patterns, they could dismiss your words as excessive emotionality, or as your problem with commitment, or as your failure to understand their struggles. Your words could be defended against or rationalized away without genuinely threatening their self-concept. Your disappearance cannot be dismissed or rationalized as easily because disappearance is definitive action that communicates clear assessment. You assessed relationship and determined it was not worth continuing. Assessed their value and determined it was insufficient to justify continued sacrifice. Assessed their patterns and decided those patterns made them inadequate partner, regardless of whatever words they used to explain or justify those patterns. The absence also creates specific ongoing wound because it removes the consistent validation source the avoidant relied upon to maintain their sense of worth. They no longer receive your pursuit to confirm they are worth chasing. They no longer receive your accommodation to confirm their patterns are acceptable. They no longer receive your patience to confirm they are valuable despite their inadequacy. This removal of validation source creates vulnerability to the underlying insecurity they suppressed through your pursuit. Without your pursuit confirming their worth, they face fears that perhaps they are not lovable, perhaps their patterns make them inadequate, perhaps no one will tolerate them as you tolerated them. The underlying insecurity emerges without your pursuit protecting them from those fears. Your disappearance particularly devastates because it demonstrates their worth was conditional on their behavior, rather than being inherent quality that would persist regardless of how they behaved. Your pursuit taught them their worth was inherent. You kept pursuing regardless of their withdrawal, suggesting they possessed value that transcended their behavior. Your disappearance teaches opposite lesson. Your continued investment was conditional on adequate reciprocation they never provided. Your pursuit had limits, their patterns eventually exceeded. Their worth was not sufficient to justify unlimited tolerance of treatment that consistently fell below acceptable standards. This recognition that their worth is conditional and that they failed to meet the conditions required to maintain your investment wounds their ego while forcing them to face that their patterns have real costs, that their previous validation through your pursuit had obscured. Understanding that your pursuit validated their worth while your absence destroyed that confirmation allows you to recognize why your disappearance created such crisis for them. You were not simply person they were in relationship with, you were validation source that confirmed their worth through your consistent pursuit despite their consistent inadequacy. Your disappearance removed that validation while demonstrating through definitive action that you assessed them and found them lacking in worth relative to cost of maintaining relationship with their patterns. Yet this recognition should not generate sympathy or guilt that pulls you back into providing validation they relied upon. Their self-worth should not depend on your willingness to pursue them despite their patterns, should not require your sacrifice of legitimate needs to maintain their defended self-concept, should not be your responsibility to protect through continued tolerance of treatment that harms you. Your disappearance teaches them necessary lesson that their worth is conditional on their behavior, that patterns have consequences, that adequate partners will not pursue indefinitely, regardless of initial attraction or investment. This lesson serves them better than continued pursuit would serve them even though lesson is painful. Continued pursuit would maintain their dysfunction, while your disappearance creates opportunity for them to develop genuine self-worth based on becoming an adequate partner rather than pseudo-worth based on someone's willingness to tolerate inadequate partnership indefinitely. They created distance expecting you to close it. You closed the door instead. The avoidance withdrawal strategy operated on specific assumption about power dynamics and control in relationship. They created distance believing distance gave them power while leaving door open for eventual return. Believing they controlled how much distance existed and when that distance would close. Believing you would do the work of closing distance they created while they maintained defended comfortable position. This strategy worked across multiple relationship cycles, where they withdrew and you pursued, where they created space and you waited patiently for them to return, where they demonstrated distance and you worked to restore connection despite their patterns creating that distance. The repeated success of this strategy taught them that withdrawal is a powerful tool that allows them to manage their defended comfort while keeping you engaged. That creating distance does not risk losing you because you will close the distance they create, that they can have both defended autonomy and relationship security without having to choose between those conflicting needs. The withdrawal strategy included implicit expectation that you would close the distance through specific predictable behaviors the avoidant anticipated and relied upon. You would text asking if they were okay after a period of their silence. You would express concern about their withdrawal that communicated you noticed their absence and were affected by it. You would make plans or suggest activities attempting to restore connection. You would reassure them of your continued interest to address any fears their withdrawal might stem from about your investment. You would tolerate the distance without implementing consequences that would make distance costly rather than comfortable for them. These expected responses allowed the avoidant to create distance while maintaining control over that distance. They knew you would close the distance they created, knew the withdrawal would not result in actual loss, knew they could return when ready without having done any work to maintain connection during their absence. Your response this time violated every element of their expected pattern. You did not text asking if they were okay. Your silence communicated indifference rather than concern. You did not express hurt about their withdrawal. Your lack of reaction suggested their presence or absence did not significantly affect you. You did not attempt to restore connection. You allowed distance to become permanent separation rather than temporary space. You did not reassure them. You removed your investment rather than reconfirming it. You implemented definitive consequence. You closed the door they expected to remain open. You ended relationship they expected to continue despite their withdrawal. You disappeared rather than remaining available for their eventual return. The closed door represents complete reversal of power dynamic the avoidant expected their withdrawal to create. They created distance expecting distance would give them power. Power to control how much connection existed. Power to determine when connection would resume. Power to maintain defended comfortable position while you did work of maintaining relationship. Yet your response to their distance gave you power instead. Power to definitively end relationship they thought they controlled. Power to remove yourself from dynamic they thought they managed. Power to close door they thought would remain open indefinitely. The avoidant discovered they did not control the distance or the door. You controlled whether you would tolerate distance or would use distance as opportunity to leave relationship where their patterns consistently demonstrated they could not or would not meet your legitimate needs. The closed door particularly wounds because it demonstrates they lost control over relationship outcome. Throughout relationship, their withdrawal strategy maintained their sense of control. They determined when to engage and when to retreat, when to provide presence and when to create distance, when connection felt comfortable and when space felt necessary. Your pursuit, despite their withdrawal, confirmed their control, because your behavior remained predictable and manageable regardless of their withdrawal. Your closing the door eliminated all their control. They cannot determine whether door reopens because you control the door. They cannot manage your response because you are no longer available to respond. They cannot retreat and return as they did previously because return requires your cooperation you are not providing. The loss of control creates anxiety. Their withdrawal strategy was designed to prevent, They withdrew to manage anxiety about intimacy, yet your response to withdrawal created different anxiety about permanent loss they cannot control or prevent. Your closed door also exposes the fundamental dishonesty in their withdrawal strategy. The strategy pretended to be about needing space or managing their defended discomfort, when actually strategy was about maintaining power and control while avoiding vulnerable investment. If withdrawal was genuinely about needing space, they would communicate that need directly and would maintain basic connection during space rather than expecting you to pursue during their silence. If withdrawal was about managing discomfort, they would do therapeutic work to expand their tolerance rather than repeatedly creating distance that harmed relationship. The pattern of withdrawal expecting pursuit revealed the strategy was about control, maintaining power position where they determined engagement level while you maintained connection despite their patterns. Your closed door called their bluff by treating withdrawal as potential ending rather than as temporary distance, by taking their created distance seriously rather than pursuing to restore connection. By ending relationship they thought they controlled through their withdrawal strategy. The closed door forces recognition that their withdrawal strategy has real costs they did not anticipate. Previous cycles taught them withdrawal is cost-free strategy. They could withdraw without losing you, could create distance without facing consequences, could maintain defended pattern without relationship ending. Your closed door teaches opposite lesson. Withdrawal has ultimate cost of losing relationship. Creating distance gave you opportunity to leave. Maintaining defended pattern resulted in definitive ending rather than in continued tolerance. This recognition could theoretically motivate examination of whether withdrawal strategy serves them or harms them, whether maintaining control through distance is worth cost of losing valuable relationships. Yet most avoidants do not translate this recognition into genuine change, because examining withdrawal strategy would require examining defended structure that strategy protects. They would need to face why they need distance, why intimacy threatens them, why they cannot tolerate vulnerable sustained connection without retreating to defended comfortable position. Understanding that they created distance expecting you to close it while you close the door instead allows you to recognize why your response created such crisis for their defended psychology. Their entire withdrawal strategy depended on your predictable pursuit, on your continued tolerance, on your willingness to close distance they created. Your closed door eliminated the strategy's effectiveness by demonstrating you will not participate in dynamic where they control distance while you do work of maintaining connection. The closed door teaches them their withdrawal has consequences, that created distance can become permanent separation, that they cannot retreat and return indefinitely because return requires partner who remains available, and you are no longer available for their familiar pattern. Yet this recognition should not generate guilt about closing door or temptation to reopen it. Their withdrawal strategy required your continued sacrifice of legitimate needs, required you to tolerate treatment that harmed you, required you to remain in relationship where you provided maximum while they provided minimum. Closing door was legitimate self-protection, was appropriate response to patterns that demonstrated they could not sustain adequate relationship, was your right to exercise regardless of whether exercise eliminated strategy they relied upon to maintain defended comfortable position at your expense. Your disappearance proved they're not as irreplaceable as they believed. The avoidant maintained inflated sense of their own value and importance throughout relationship, sense that they were a special person whose unique qualities made them irreplaceable, whose limited availability made them more valuable through scarcity, whose defended independence made them attractive catch rather than inadequate partner. This inflated self-perception developed partly through your behavior that reinforced their perceived value. You pursued them consistently, suggesting they were worth pursuing. You tolerated their patterns, suggesting their presence justified accepting inadequate treatment. You remained invested despite minimal reciprocation, suggesting they provided something so valuable that you would sacrifice yourself to maintain access to them. Your behavior confirmed their belief that they were an unusually valuable partner, whose worth exceeded yours, whose patterns you should accommodate, because having them in your life was privilege that justified extensive sacrifice. The inflated self-perception also stemmed from the avoidant's defended interpretation of relationship dynamics. They interpreted your pursuit as evidence of their high value rather than as evidence of your anxious attachment or your codependent patterns. They interpreted your accommodation as evidence they were special enough to deserve accommodation rather than as evidence you had poor boundaries and low self-worth. They interpreted your continued investment, despite inadequate reciprocation, as evidence they possessed unique qualities that justified imbalanced dynamic, rather than as evidence you were settling for less than you deserved. Every dynamic that actually reflected your issues or your sacrifice got reinterpreted as confirmation of their exceptional value. The more you sacrificed yourself, the more special they believed themselves to be for inspiring such sacrifice. Your disappearance shattered this inflated self-perception by demonstrating through definitive action that they are not irreplaceable, not uniquely valuable, not special enough to justify unlimited tolerance and continued sacrifice. You assessed relationship and determined you could live without them better than you could live with them. You evaluated their worth and concluded their patterns made them inadequate partner whose value did not justify accepting harmful treatment. You moved forward with your life demonstrating that life without them is preferable to life with them, given the cost relationship required. Your disappearance communicated clear message: they are replaceable, their value is insufficient to warrant continued investment, their supposed special qualities are not sufficient to compensate for their consistent inadequacy. The proof of their replaceability particularly wounds their ego when they observe or learn about your moving on. You are building satisfying life without them demonstrating they were not essential to your happiness. You are connecting with other people, demonstrating they were not irreplaceable source of intimacy and connection. You are thriving in their absence. Demonstrating relationship with them was limitation rather than enhancement of your well-being. Each observation of your successful moving on reinforces the devastating recognition that you do not need them, that life without them exceeds life with them, that they were not as important or irreplaceable as their inflated self-perception suggested. You are living proof that they are replaceable and that replacing them with their absence improves your life. Your disappearance also demonstrates that their scarcity strategy backfired by making them too scarce. The avoidant maintained limited availability, believing scarcity would increase their value. If they were hard to access, if their presence was rare, if their attention was limited, then their value would increase through scarcity principle that makes rare things more desirable than abundant things. This strategy assumed you would continue valuing scarce access to them, would continue finding limited availability attractive rather than frustrating, would continue accepting minimal presence as sufficient because minimal presence from valuable person exceeds abundant presence from less valuable person. Yet scarcity strategy has natural limit. If something becomes too scarce, people stop pursuing it and find alternatives that provide more reliable access. Your disappearance demonstrates they crossed that limit where scarcity no longer increased value, but instead made them irrelevant. You stopped pursuing scarce access and found that abundant access to alternatives exceeded value of scarce access to them. The shattered sense of irreplaceability forces recognition that perhaps their defended patterns are more problematic than they believed, perhaps their value is lower than their inflated self-perception suggested, perhaps adequate partners will not tolerate their limitations indefinitely, regardless of their supposed special qualities. This recognition creates ego wound that cannot be easily healed because your disappearance provides undeniable evidence contradicting their inflated self-perception. They cannot dismiss your disappearance as your problem or your inadequacy because your thriving without them demonstrates leaving them improved your life. They cannot rationalize your disappearance as your loss because your moving forward proves they were replaceable and that replacing them benefited you. They must face that perhaps they are not as special or irreplaceable as they believe themselves to be. This facing threatens their entire defended self-concept.